Namaste. It's a real pleasure to be joining you tonight for this session for the ICCS's seventh international gathering of elders and ancient traditions. My name is Sachin Nanda, and I'm talking to you from the United Kingdom. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. For this session, the ICCS's seventh. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce the ICCS to you all at this time. The ICCS, the International Center for Cultural Studies, was set up some 25 years ago. In that time, it has been run completely by volunteers and funded by well-wishers. We have had mass global support for the work that we do. The ICCS endeavors to give a platform and a voice to all the ancient traditions of our planet. The center has volunteers all over the world working from centers such as Colombia, the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, East Africa, India, Indonesia, just to name a few. This conference is the seventh such conference that happens once every 3 years. And this is the first ever virtual conference organized by the ICCS. And it's been a real pleasure to work with our volunteers from all over the world. And I, for one, am privileged to be introducing this session. This particular session excites me because I come from a background which is to do with the rights that we talk about, the rights of the forest. I come from a commerce background, and to come from that background, I can understand how human society has constructed its laws to be and to favor a particular modality, a particular way of behaving, in a particular mindset. This topic particularly excites me because, and I'm really excited to hear what our expert witnesses and our elders have to say about this, where we have the opportunity to explore cutting edge ideas that could change the way in which we perceive our societies and ourselves within the natural world. A deep, meaningful way in which how our institutions could reconnect with nature, be in harmony with nature. The notion of rights of a forest or rights of a river are not new. Ancient traditions, and I can say many activists all over the world, but especially in India, have been lobbying, Hindu groups have been lobbying governments for over 30 years to make rivers have rights, where they have legal rights under the law, so that they too are seen as part parcel of our society, as living beings. And in the same way, I'm excited to hear what we will today discuss, which is that why ought forests not have these rights that corporations enjoy? Why are they not treated under the law as living beings? And how would the society change if indeed we began to see the natural world, the natural habitat, as living things around us? Things that the world is patently aware of, that these things are alive and they are sacred, and we are all interconnected. Our welfare is dependent on its welfare, and its welfare is interdependent on our welfare. With that realization, what is the way forward? And I am excited to hear from our elders, our experts. I want to introduce you to our moderator for this session. David Rodriguez Mora, welcome to ICCS.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Brilliant. David is studying currently for his master's in plant biology at North Carolina State University. His graduate study focuses around the sacred plant popularly known as ayahuasca. He has taught at the prestigious Duke University, focusing on ethnobiology and tropical biology in the cloud forest and rainforest of Costa Rica. David is clearly a learned young person in this field, and I'm super excited to kind of hear him moderate this. David, over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, it is my pleasure to be here with you all. It is an honor to have this opportunity to have a great conversation that is going to enable us to connect plants, humans, and sound. So I'm very excited about this. And I want to start by welcoming the person who is going to open this conversation with a prayer, which is a song. He is Ninawa Pereira, and he's a leader of the Hunikui people of the Acre Federation, they are known as people who have a strong connection to the territory through the song. So that's how he's going to start our session today. And in addition to this role that he plays as a leader of his people, he's also an academic technologist in environmental management. He is a project management technician at the Dom Moasir Professional Education Development Institute in Rio Branco, Acre. And he is a technician in cooperative management in the Catuquina, Caxinawa indigenous lands by the Dom Moasir Professional Education Development Institute, also in Acre. His recent work has focused primarily in the development of organic agriculture and also on prevention for COVID. So I'm going to pass now the word to Ninawa for him to open this conversation. Thank you.
Hola. Buenas noches. Muy buenas noches a todos y a todas. Yo quiero compartir con ustedes una oración de mi pueblo, que es una oración para la paz, que es una canción para la cura. Yo quiero compartir en nombre de mi pueblo por la espiritualidad de la madre naturaleza, de la madre tierra, a cada uno de nosotros, para que hacemos una gran alianza, que el espíritu pueda estar sanando las personas que necesitan. Que todas las palabras que se van a salir en esta charla, que se puede tener la bendición de los espíritus. Ush, 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 ush. Sitting, 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 sitting. Sitting, 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 sitting. Puxar, 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 puxar. Irã. Yoba mana ibubu. Yoba mana ibubu. Mana ibubu tan. Iskawashun kayawai kayawai kiki. Yoba mana ibubu, yoba mana ibubu, mana ibubu tan, habu tabi kawankin, iskawa shunka yawai kiki. Yoba kuna ibubu. Yubu kunai bubu tan habu tabi kawangi Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yubu hanai bubu. Yubu hanai bubu. Hanai bubu butan. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yubu shinai bubu. Yubu shinai bubu. Shinai bubu tan. Abu tabi kawanki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Atum bawa. Joshin bawa. Abu tabi kawanki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yuba niwa yoshibu, yuba niwa yoshibu, niwa yoshibu butan. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yuba bari yoshibu, yuba bari yoshibu, bari yoshibu butan. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yuba usha yoshibu. Yuba usha yoshibu, usha yoshibu butan. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yubu bishi yoshibu. Yubu bishi yoshibu, bishi yoshibu butan. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Yubu yama yoshibu. Yubu yama yoshibu, yama yoshibu butan. Abu tabi kawanki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Iskawa shunka yawai kayawai kiki. Ush. 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 Tapia shabaquim. Chinang shabaquim. Chinang cubico branquim. Ush. 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 House. 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 Muchas gracias a todos y a todas. Que el Gran Espíritu puede llegar hasta ustedes y que puede hacer las palabras más verdaderas, más ciertas y fuertes. Ush, house, house, house.
Thank you so much, Nawa, for this beautiful opening. I feel honored to have received this prayer from you and also very grateful for being able to continue with this conversation in that vibration, which is basically the topic of tonight, vibration. So we are going to start by introducing the panelists. I will start first with Monica Galliano, who is an Italian scientist. She's a research associate professor in evolutionary ecology at the Southern Cross University in Australia. She's also an adjunct research associate professor at the University of Western Australia, a research affiliate at the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney, Australia. She's a pioneer in the brand new research field of plant bioacoustics, where she had demonstrated that plants emit their own sounds and they also detect and respond to the sounds of their environment. Her work is particularly known for extending the concept of plant cognition, and that has included the concept of plant perception, learning processes in plants, and plant memory. She has extensively written in multiple peer-reviewed journals, and her work has also been featured in the public press, including the New York Times. Her latest book is Thus Spoke the Plant, a remarkable journey of groundbreaking scientific discoveries and personal encounters with plants. So we're very excited to have Monica tonight with us. And I'm going to introduce the next panelists too, so that you all have the introduction of them first, and then we'll start the conversation itself. Our other panelist is Balm Ram Singh, who is also a scientist, but he is from India. He's an adjunct professor at the School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies at the Jawaharlal University in Delhi, in India. But he is a former professor of chemistry and biotechnology at the University of Massachusetts in the United States. And he has also worked as a professor at other institutions, including the University of Madison in Wisconsin and Georgetown University, also in the United States. He is the president of the Institute of Advanced Sciences and the founder of Prime Bio, which is a biotechnology-based company. And his work has centered on botulism neurotoxins, which are toxins that cause paralysis, and also tetanus neurotoxins, which cause tissue damage. He's the author of 14 books and over 325 articles, mainly on biochemistry, but also about India's philosophy and tradition. Furthermore, Bal is a poet as well, so we're very excited to hear from all the multidisciplinary approaches that Bal has taken in his career. And finally, I'm going to introduce our other panelist, who is Stephen Feld. He's an anthropologist from the United States, senior scholar at the School of Advanced Research in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's also a distinguished professor emeritus of anthropology at the University of New Mexico. And his work has dealt primarily with the anthropology of sound. He's actually a pioneer in this field. It's a line of work that has expanded the field of music and language anthropology. So it has offered a critical sensory and aesthetic focus on all species sound relations and environmental and ecological acoustics in general. His research has primarily been conducted in the Bosabi region, the Bosabi Rainforest of Papua New Guinea, where he has produced numerous articles, books, even a dictionary, CDs, films, and that has included two works that have been very well known, Sound and Sentiment and Voices of the Rainforest, which is available at the Smithsonian Folkways. Steve, in addition to being an anthropologist, is a filmmaker, a musician, and a sound artist, but especially as he describes himself, he's a professional listener. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with the three of you who have an amazing amount of experiences, and I think are going to enable us to have a very rich conversation tonight. And the way that I want to start this conversation is by actually putting on the table some basic concepts that we can try to define from all these different angles in relation to what the conversation is about. So it's about sound, plants, and humans. So I would like to ask you to give us your perspective on sound. What is sound? Let's try to tackle this concept through your experiences. So if anyone wants to start, you can volunteer for starting, or I can also popcorn one of you. Maybe popcorn will work. Oh, I think Bal unmuted his microphone. So Bal,
well,
you have the ground for you.
Yeah, I thought someone should start with the sound, so I thought speaking is a good sound. So, I mean, my perspective is that everything started with sound. In physics, the Big Bang is a sound. And obviously, there is a perspective about that as to where that sound came from. And in Indian philosophy, that is known as prana. And the prana is the energy that initiates everything, and that initiates with sound. And everything else begins from there. And there is this philosophy of kosha or sheath for everyone, from rocks to angels. They all start with the seed system. It's in Sanskrit it's called kosha system, and plants are the one which are defined as the first visible systems, living systems that are representative of pranas or the energy. And so the plants really begin this whole idea. They have in them, the plants have in them as living beings, something that is the beginning of everything as far as the living things are concerned. And this idea of plants being living was initiated, at least in modern scientific terms, by Sir J.C. Bose, who wrote a book of living and non-living and nervous. He wrote a book in 1902, this living and non-living. And then he wrote, and subsequently did a lot of experiments, including what we are today communicating. This idea was also discovered by him, although the credit was given to Markovnikov. Later on has been recognized that was his idea. But interesting thing I wanted to mention about that, he wrote a book called The Nervous Mechanism of Plants. The nervous mechanism of plants, what we are today trying to even think about from nerves, that he worked on that. And you introduced me with botulinum neurotoxins, and I was very fascinated to find out what is in the neurotoxin causes paralysis by acting on a protein called SNAP25. And I was so puzzled to find that SNAP25 is also found in plants. So our nerves are connected with the plant's nerves, and this idea of living and perception, and the fact that there is a prana, which is the energy that is beginning of this Big Bang. So I see the plants are not just something that we see today and they're useful, but actually they are the basis of all of us. And they have the same level of chemistry and physics as we do, and probably a much better. So I will stop it there, and then I listen to others.
Thank you so much, Paul. Exciting beginning. So I'll give the word to either Steve or Monica. Monica, I can see your laughter is making you come to the stage. So please join us.
I should have, I think it should have been Stephen to go first, really. But anyway, thank you. And before I comment on the question, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am in Arakwal country. And so I give respect to all of the people, plant, animal, indigenous, non-indigenous, who are on the land at the moment. And I'm very grateful to be here. And in the context of sounds, of course, I'm surrounded. I live very embedded in what we have as a forest, and I am surrounded by sounds all the time. So I'm very aware that sound is omnipresent. But even from a physics perspective, like sounds, it's a mechanical wave, and if there is any movement, that is a sound. Basically, you cannot be here without making any sound, and so it's almost like a mute question whether what is sound and whether it's important, or whether plants have it, or basically from my perspective, this entire system is it's like sound is foundational. There is no way around it. There is no way out of it. And in that sense, then, well, plants have been around for way much longer than we have. And I would say that they probably went through the phase that we are still in of talking so much. And now they are just really good listeners. So that's why they seem so quiet, and so quiet to the point that we think that they have nothing to say. And so quiet to the point that only more recently we have built technology that allows to extend our ears in a way that we can hear them. But, you know, as we know from our indigenous people from around the world, you know, we are very capable of listening too. It's just that we are talking so much. So sound can be used in both ways. And I have to agree with Bal. I think that, you know, they would have been mastering this from the beginning. And maybe mastery becomes that you become an extremely good listener and you stop talking so much, making so much noise. But I'm sure actually Stephen's got much more to say on this, so I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I think that's a great transition into our professional listener. I feel very excited and moved by the work of Steve because, yeah, he's focused on capturing basically those sounds that we have stopped listening or that we have decided to ignore. So, Steve, please give us your take on sound.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge that I live on the unceded lands of the Tewa-speaking Puebloan people of northern New Mexico, to whom I give my respects. And behind me, I bring you the greetings from the people who call themselves Bosavi and who refer to themselves as Hinausha Dagan, the voices of the rainforest. And even though I had studied acoustics and linguistics and music, it was a new learning adventure for me 45 years ago to be introduced to the idea that every presence in the world is a voice, a Dagan. And a voice means presence in the human form, it means presence in the ancestral form, and it means presence in the material form. And one cannot isolate these things because they are all relating. So, for instance, even when I would try to take a singing lesson with a Bosavi elder, that elder would take me to a place in the forest where we were hearing many, many things, and start out by having me, with my voice, merge with the water, and then explain to me that water moves through land like voice moves through the body, that these are moving forces. And so motion and sound and voice are the same, just like presence, vibration, all of the features of the spectrum are relational, whether they're visual, tactile, related to heat, propriocentric, you know, smell, taste, that the whole sensory world revolves around sound, and that the whole sensory world is a voice. To taste something is to, in the Bosavi world, is to meet a new voice. And so we're constantly tasting things for the first time or retasting things. And that is a way of integrating our voices with those of the ancestors, like what we call a bird behind me is in the Bosavi language, muni, in English, the beautiful fruit dove, in Latin, Tilenopus pulchellus. This is the bird that has intervals in its voice that gave to people the ability to cry and to sing and to make poetry. And so this way of listening to the world, listening closely to these birds and knowing everything about their intervals and their sounds, and then reflecting them back with voices that merge with them by creating song or creating poetry or crying is a kind of sensory merging of different ways of being. So this is all a way of saying that voice is this in the center for Bosavi people of the idea that being does not pre-exist relating, that relating is, and relationship is the primal force of the world, and the center of that is the voice. It's very important for Bosavi people that every human being that they've ever encountered has a different voice, has a different vibration recipe. Every presence in the world, every kind of water. And of course, you know, how could you disconnect water or disconnect birds from plants? I mean, where do they live anyway? Who are they in vibrational relationship with? So it doesn't matter for Bosavi people. It's not a question for them whether plants speak in some kind of way or make sounds or whether they hear sounds. There's the intuition is that they are relationally sounding with birds, with water, because this is the source of their life. This is the source of their relational nexus in the universe. So what I bring to the table here in terms of sound is a way of thinking through this Bosavi teaching about voice. That sound is relational with light and color and heat and all other sensory forces, just as it is with land and water and all living forms, non-living forms, spiritual forms, because ultimately in this kind of way of thinking and hearing, we are here to listen to one another, to listen to all of those relationships. Listening is the way of being in relationship.
Thank you so much, Steve. And well, this makes me think of the idea that Monica has defended or has brought on her research a lot, because, well, in the end, it's certainly her effort to bring the plant's voice on the table as beings that have attributes and abilities that we have just recently started to acknowledge in other species different from human. And I'm interested to take this conversation into the realm of learning. So how will sound is related to learning, and those voices that we can learn from also include the voices of plants or the sound of plants. So I want to bring this additional concept to the conversation about learning, what learning is for you, and how other beings, particularly plants, have a role in teaching us and for us to learn from them. So again, like any of you could start if you like to share your perspective on that learning and plant learning and us learning from plants.
I want to bring an aspect of, again, my background is chemistry. I did my PhD in photomorphogenesis, which is a particular, being a chemist, I worked on particular pigment called phytochrome. And phytochrome is the perception, it perceives light. I think like Steve was talking, is everything is a sound. And when we convert that into sound, and I put my framework of this Big Bang, everything started with Big Bang. So it is really the sound. You know, nobody call it big flash, although the light is the one which moves much faster than sound, at least in the realm of what we can hear. But nevertheless, what I wanted to go back to this learning, the plants have the mechanism of learning. And the only reason I'm bringing a human is because we learn through what we know. And how do we learn? How do we see something when we see a light? We see with our eyes, and eyes have pigments called rhodopsin. And plants have this pigment called phytochrome. My research was totally to understand the chemical mechanism. And it is very fascinating, and would not go into chemistry of it, very fascinating, exactly same mechanism that our eye uses with the rhodopsin, and how the structure changes as the light is received is exactly same as plants have the same mechanism. So it seems like we have evolved from these plants mechanism, and we have created this eyes to learn, to see things. And as we see in plants, this is just a seeing, but they also have hearing, as we heard from Monica. They also have smell. The plants have a smell. So if you there is several studies done that where it says that if the forest, at one end of the forest, that is, for example, there is a fungal infection, and so they communicate, and you slowly you find, not actually slowly, very fast, actually find the other end of the plants they develop resistance, and that resistance is because they have learned from the one end, because the blowing in the air is this smell, or it's the chemical actually, but they perceive what we would perceive as a smell. So they have the seeing, they can smell. They also, plants can then respond. And when I was doing research with cranberries in Massachusetts, and cranberries color is very important, but cranberry also have some kind of diseases. But the interesting thing is that there are fungal, which, by the way, are considered the primitive plants. They have something eliciting. They elicit a response, and that so is a broad level of understanding of not only seeing and smelling, but also tasting. So they when the fungus is with the plant almost tastes it and then responds to it, and responds with the resistance. And that response is something that we can use for variety of things, including sometimes as herbal treatment. And so the plants also have this level of learning, and when there is something goes on in the environment, they respond to that, and they produce certain types of chemicals or biochemicals, which are we know today as herbal treatments, because plants have better response than we as human beings, and then we are able to use the same response or molecules to treat ourselves, because we do not have that capability, and plants have capability of learning and responding and helping us. So I find your question very fascinating in terms of not only learning, but also responding and helping, which is better than what we as human beings we do, because plants do it for others, whereas we do most of the time for ourselves. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Val. That's fascinating as well to hear and to acknowledge those abilities that plants have and the way that they contribute in our lives, which, I mean, we are somewhat familiar with them. We use them daily, but yeah, we may not be very aware of the way that they have accomplished to produce these substances. So thank you. I'll leave the word to Monica or Steve to provide your take on that, on the learning of plants and how we can learn from them too. Steve wants Monica to start, and Monica wants Steve to start. You both have wonderful points. So there you go, Monica.
I've been pointed at. That's very rude. Okay, so I would say the first thing that comes to mind, and also listening to Bao, is this idea that there is a process of learning. And often is when we talk about learning, we think about to know something, and we know it through experience. And but I think for me, because experience basically is another word for saying being, you're being, and you're being living, and you're having these experiences called living or being. And so for me, we learn when we are being, but the mediator of that in that experience is the listening. And so listening and learning are actually the same thing. You will not learn if you're not open to listen. And if you're not open to listen, you can learn, because nothing new is allowed to come in, and nothing new is allowed to change you, even change your mind. And in a way, for me, it speaks very much to what Stephen was already talking about before, in terms of, I guess, a learning or an experience of living and listening that is very embodied and is very grounded, is very present with the space and the place and the time of where you are. And I suppose, you know, in science, as a scientist myself, we seem to waste a lot of precious time talking about concepts and discussing and debating about concepts. And I have experienced that directly in relation to my work in terms of cognition, like learning and memory. And there is so much talking about what do we mean, and yet from a personal perspective, both in very deep sacred spaces, but also in the triviality of gardening, which has got nothing trivial, of course, and in the even more trivial, which is not, experience of eating every day and breathing every moment. It seems like, again, a silly debate, a silly question, a waste of time. Why are we wasting time talking about what do we mean by plant learning, and what does it mean? It's like we are all experiencing that every moment. And I suspect that the more grounded and the more embodied in that you are as a human being, the less important that question is. And actually, probably it's not even of any importance whatsoever. And so as a scientist, of course, I felt it was part of my job to bridge the need for giving words and a language that could describe this experience in the context of plants. But from my own personal experience as the human being, the experience of learning actually doesn't have any words, because I'm doing it right now. And so I'm filling the space with words that try to describe what I'm doing, but actually I'm doing it, and I know I'm doing it. I know I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm embodying, I'm grounding, all at the same time. And so from that perspective, again, the question is mute. And I wonder if we have arrived at a point where science is like a dog that has been chasing the tail. And, we already knew, then we pretended that we didn't know anymore. And we started making up all these new concept, ideas, terms to explore, to find ways to convince ourselves back that, actually, what we already knew was actually right all along. And so it's a very exciting, interesting exercise, or utterly boring, depending on the perspective. And personally, I found myself swinging between those two extremes. And sometimes I feel I have something to say that maybe can support others in terms of remembering, really, not anything. There's nothing new that I need to say. It's just a remembering, like, you already know all of this. And other times it just feels like I'm just here to learn, and the best way is for me to listen. And so I don't actually have anything to say. But I'm sure Steve does. So to you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Well, you have certainly have a lot of important points to put on the table as we speak about this, because in reality, what's happening is that we have stopped listening and stopped remembering these lessons from nature around us, from plants, from the landscapes, and Yeah, I will give the word to Steve, but I certainly want to point out to you before that, Monica, that yeah, this is something that we are relearning now, and that it's very important for us to push this movement towards relearning and re-listening. So thank you. Before actually give the word to Steve, just a request that I have been sent for the audience. Please type your questions on the chat. You are welcome to type them so that we can gather them and then bring them as well to the panelists. So Steve, please share with us your take on plant learning and human learning from plants.
Thank you. Well, I've learned a lot from Monica, who has the courage to put the words plant and perception or plant and cognition next to each other. And I think that it's sometimes by shifting the ground, by putting different kinds of words next to each other in new ways, that we force ourselves to, take seriously not just the wonders of science and the world, but also the need to always start fresh. And my way of starting fresh when I was trained as a linguist is that I learned to make mistakes. That the most important way to learn something about a language was to make big mistakes, but then to be able to formally understand why something is a mistake or is not. If I say my Stephen is name, I think anyone who's a native English speaker will know that's ungrammatical. It would take me a while to explain to you why it's ungrammatical, but the point is we have an intuition that it doesn't work. So something that's really great is when you hang out with children and you're trying to learn their language or learn something about their world, you learn a tremendous amount by the things that people laugh at, just like we might laugh or shake our head at an ungrammatical sentence or a sentence that shakes up the elements in a certain kind of way. So when I would go out in the forest with my microphone and children would accompany me, and I would point it, there would be a lot of hysterical laughing all around me, and 10 and 11 and 12-year-old kids would jump up and grab my arm and pull it into a certain place, and then the bird would be perfectly on the tape and in my ears. And so I asked myself, how is this possible? How can a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old child know the position of all these birds in the forest when they can't see 3 feet in front of them? I began using experiences like this to try and rethink the whole concept of learning and knowing. And I had a wonderful experience one time when a child who had never seen a white person was in my village and was screaming, was terrified of me. And I had just come back from the forest, and the child's mother said to me, "Take off your boot." And I took off my boot, and the woman brought the child to me, and the child touched the bottom of my feet. The child began laughing, and all of a sudden was tremendously calm. And then the woman said to me, "You people have feet like infants. They're pink on the bottom. You haven't walked anywhere. It's like you have no tread on your tires. You can't hear with your feet. You can't feel the world around you, even the way a 1 or 2-year-old kid who's, barefoot running around here can. Your feet are separated from the world." And to me, that was like a wonderful kind of learning moment, relating sound and feeling and the body and an simple observation about difference. And now, 45 years later, when I go back to the rainforest, people are still telling that story, and kids are always coming around and saying, "Can we see the bottom of your feet? Are they still pink?" And this is a way of saying, you're not in the world the way we're in the world, but we understand you're in the world. And so to learn or know through sound is to learn and know through the body. I call this acoustemology or acoustic epistemology, sound as a way of knowing. And the way I approach it is to listen to these histories of listening. And listening to histories of listening can be something you do entirely through your ears, or it can be done with your hands or with your eyes. But this is a bodily form of reinventing your way of emplacing yourself. The favorite children's game in Bosavi is to look out into the forest, like if you're looking out behind me, and one child will say waterfall, and the next child will say Gulusa waterfall, and the next one will say Muni bird at Gulusa waterfall, and the next one will say Wen tree by the Muni bird at Gulusa waterfall, and this will go on until it's like a elaborate paint by number exercise, and you can get 40 or 50 rounds of descriptions of these details of the world. This is about a bodily, full-on sensory way of emplacing oneself, finding your voice in all of these other voices, all of these other presences. And so, you know, as Monica says, and this goes very much with what Paul's saying, we have to bring everything about learning back to experience, and experience means, you know, you have to start from some point of view. You have to have some kind of yardstick. You have to have some kind of way of measuring. Every physicist knows that if you know, touch a voltmeter to a crystal, you change the electrical potential of the crystal. But it doesn't matter because voltmeters are calibrated. So we know how much it's going to change the electrical potential of the crystal. But with human beings and with plants, this is somewhat of a different exercise. How do we calibrate what it means to make that mistake in the language? How does it mean, how do we calibrate what it means to not know certain things, or to know them incorrectly, or to walk around in the world with the bottom of your feet still pink when you're 70 years old? And these are you know, the ways that learning is always continuous. If I wanted to make my learning really continuous, I'd start working on my feet. I mean, from Bosavi point of view, because then I would know and feel and sense much more of the world beyond what it is that I can hear and smell and see and touch.
Wow, thank you so much, Steve. This actually, it's starting to go in the direction that I wanted to explore regarding those lessons that you want to share with us all tonight, about what is the best approach that we can take right now to reverse the damage that we have caused for precisely stopping to listen to those beings around us, plants in particular. And you have already given us some clue. So I want to basically give you all this opportunity to integrate those lessons that plants and sound have given you, to give us some advice, or at least your perspective regarding how we could approach these challenges that we're living at present, to restore those relationships, to recognize that voice from the plants and other organisms. And then if you want, also even that collective voice that landscape give us, and ultimately that collective voice that we can all give as one biosphere to keep a healthy, sustainable living Gaia, Mother Earth. So I like to give the opportunity to any of you to answer those pieces of advice you want to share tonight.
I propose Monica to begin this line of questioning.
What is this?
Let me touch the bottom of your
title
feet.
of your book.
I wasn't rude.
The title of your book says it all, Monica. It says, "Let plants speak." So
That's
tell
right.
us what you've heard.
That's it. I was, listening, of course, to David Philippe for your, as you were formalizing the question. And well, certainly I have no advice, but I can offer, I can share my perspective just because that's all I have. And I guess it goes back, it's been already said throughout by, you know, in the conversation by all of us. I think that the key word, it's whether you do it through grounding, embodying, listening, learning, you can use whatever words that fit best for your own experience. But ultimately is the recognition of these, that you are in a relational world. And that is not an option. It's not like that you can choose if you're going to be in relationship or not. It's like this relationship, the one with the world where you're living, which includes everyone, humans and non-humans, material and non-material, spiritual and non-spiritual, whatever that means, if there is anything like non-spiritual. You are in relation to everything because you are the relationships that makes you. And so really it's just a recognition of that. I think the quicker we recognize that we are embedded in a world, we are the world of kinship and relationship, the quicker we wake up from this strange place where we believe we're not. And the reason for waking up from there is, apart from the obvious, which is distraction of our own world, but it's also like the amount of depression and sadness that we feel. It's not that we are happy in a world of separated and, you know, in a very digital, in that sense, in a very digital world, we're not that happy. I think we're looking for reconnecting and, again, re-embedding ourselves or remembering ourselves as the analog world that we are. So made of all the nuances, all of the senses, all of the, you know, all of the feelings, everything that is available that makes us. And I guess, as I said, like, I think we have touched on much of this already throughout the conversation. So, you know, just breathe. Isn't that already a pretty amazing feat? It's like you're breathing in the world, mostly, you know, courtesy of the plants in terms of physics, because they are providing you with the oxygen. But like really, we are breathing in the world, and then we are breathing out the world. And the world is breathing us in and out as well. And isn't that pretty outstanding just of itself? So the rest are little acrobatics that we do to entertain ourselves maybe. And some of them are really cool and interesting and fun, and allows us, some of these conversations allows us to feel our kinship and connection. And maybe that's why we do them. But the content in itself, I don't think it matters. It's more about the actual enacting of what we are. And we're just this life in this form that is the same as the other forms and the other lives that, you know, we share the place with. So thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Very grounding. Also, I leave the opportunity to Steve or Val to volunteer answering this part of the conversation.
I began your other question. Oh, Steve is on. I was going to go and propose his name. So,
Okay. Well, thank you, Bal, and thank you, Monica. I want to pick up where Monica has, for those who've read her books and heard her speak, has proposed something very forceful, which is, you know, about feeling our kinship. And feeling is a key word here. And, you know, I learned this going back to children and so forth with very simple exercises. It was astonishing to me at first that in a world where I could identify over time with the help of experts maybe 125 or 130 species of birds, that I never encountered a young person, say 13 or 14 years old in Bosavi, who couldn't identify at least 75 or 80 birds by their calls. But when you start to speak to people about, the bird and the name and identifying the bird, very quickly they start telling you about what the bird eats and what kinds of trees it goes to, and when it migrates and when it moves and at what niche in the forest it gets its protection and so forth. And so listening is listening to life. And this is about feeling our kinship. This is precisely what I think, Monica's led us into with the sensory reality of plant life and the sensory world of plant life. And so I could hear in the voices of those children that they were listening to life. They were not just, this is not just about it being able to identify things in the world. It's about the way sound is a pathway into knowing this relationality. And the most important thing that I was ever taught about relationality is something I didn't grasp at first, but it took me many years, but it came to me very early. I was hunting one day with an experienced hunter. We were going out to inspect traps that he had taught me how to put down, and for marsupials, bandicoots. And at one point we're inspecting these traps and he's telling me why they don't have anything in them, which was a way of learning from my mistakes and learning about, the proper sequence of doing things. And then he just looked at me and said, "Hey, CD, what in your place, what do you do if another guy gives you 2 smoked marsupials?" And I just sort of looked at him and didn't really think about it. And I said, "Well, in time, I'd give him 2 back." He looked at me like I was absolutely pathetic. And he said, "I would give 7. And so welcome to Bosavi Sociology 101. If it doesn't grow, it's not a social relationship. And so getting the score up or down to even is not what is really happening in the world. What is happening in the world is that we're living in a network of amplification. And everything is living in amplified, and this again comes back to feeling our kinship. What we're feeling is the amplification. And this again is vibrational in many kinds of ways, getting back to a number of things that Bal said in the openings of our conversations. So this idea that, I sort of resist the notion of now, oh, we're listening to birds or we're listening to plants or we're listening to waterfalls. We're listening to life. We're listening to the very way in which feeling our kinship is the process by which we amplify our presence in the world. And amplifying in our presence in the world, takes us right back to, why Monica would title a book, "Thus Spoke the Plant." That is, what is that presence that we associate with voice, with having a perspective, with being there in a way that, calls us into relation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Val, go ahead.
I'll try to see what I absolutely learned so much. What Monica said was profound. That we in the process of our learning, sometimes we go away from where the reality is or the truth is to just find out that, well, we went too far, and that's just the way we are. I think I want to bring just a couple of examples, particularly the field of Ayurveda. I'm in the field of drug development. I develop drugs in modern scientific way, where we use the structures, we do all kind of analysis, and finally we try to find out. We spend billions of dollars and we charge everybody tons of money to give them some medication that had a lot of side effects. And in this process, when I was exposed to the system of plant herbs, I was very fascinated because in my modern research, I do animal research. We inject animals with toxins, and then they die, or how long they take it to die, and all kind of things. How safe this drug is. We have the animal studies, but I was very fascinated to find out how the Ayurveda people have figured out all this, so many thousands and thousands of plant herbs, and they know exactly how that might work for which person at which particular time. And I was so amazed when I asked many people. So they also study, and they also do animal studies. So I wanted to know what kind of animal studies they do. Well, these Ayurveda herbalists are the people who develop drugs, plant drugs, herbal drugs. They watch animals. They don't inject in animals anything. They don't even feed them. They just watch them. And when the animals get sick for some reason, they stop eating, and they, after a while, when they get up, they eat a particular plant. So they have an idea which plant is useful to them. What Monica said earlier, that we go around and try to find out to come back. So we have an animal studies which gives almost absolutely nothing, because we have to do the clinical studies after that. And these animals, if we really watch the animals and they learn from them, because somehow they have better feeling about plants than we have as human beings. And then I learned more that these Ayurveda people, they have communication with plants. They learn, they have the feeling, the five perceptions that we have, sense of organs. They have this, they use this listening, the touching, the seeing, the feeling, and that's how they identify a particular herb, how that will be useful in a particular condition. So it is very fascinating that we learn so much, we communicate so much, and plants have so much to teach us only if we can tune in. So what I'm telling is a story of what Monica said. I mean, I still practice my structural biology and everything else. And but finally we find what I call now as a sensory chemistry. We have our own senses, we tune to these plants, and we learn so much. And it has to be a training. I think what Steve was mentioning, every child gets to learn to feel throughout their body, not just the listening and words. I think the words limit us. When we are using words, I think, Monica, I think the process, watching my grandchildren, I think they are smarter than my daughter, because they can always run her around, because they have better sense, because they don't speak. The moment you start learning speaking, you need limit yourselves. And I think to this idea of communicating without necessarily words is a fantastic, and plants are smarter not using words. They communicate differently, that as we have learned. And the last point I want to make, and I learned this also, these vibrations are mentioned in Vedas, in every other tradition that I know of natural and indigenous traditions, that they have some kind of vibrations, oscillations. And that is, I was so surprised to know that's the karma, that we call about karma. Our karmas are doing this. The karmas are fundamentally defined as the vibrations, and that is the sound, in a way that we are calling it today. So our karma is sound, our seeing is sound, our feeling is sound, and that plants are master of it. And I think so it's so much for us to learn. And I'm a practical person who started my research in chemistry using plants, and come around a long way, going to animal studies, bacterial proteins, and all kind of stuff. And today I'm looking at plants and learning from them and using them to find a better, much cheaper, much simpler way to keep our health and move forward. Thank you.
Val, thank you so much. It's been fascinating to have this honor to explore these different topics with you. I think that it's exciting for everyone, the audience as well, to be able to weave together these different topics that, you know, for our current lifestyle may seem a little apart from one another, of how plants and sounds are interwoven, and us as well into that relation. So I've learned a lot tonight. I'm really grateful with this opportunity. Now we're going to have the Q&A part of the conversation. So I will give the word to Eleonora so that she can share with us if there's any questions, and we can have the concluding remarks after that.
Thank you. We have a question here from Ivan Dario, and he wants to ask Monica. If you please, Monica, can you tell us how your experience working with plants, both in the lab and elsewhere, have transformed the way you see the social role of science in today's world? Namely, how a new science of sorts can better serve the transition we are currently towards an Earth-centered paradigm? Or to any of the panelists, but addressing you first, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you. How much time do I have? Because this is a big question, and but also not. I guess I was trained as as many scientists today, looking at the world made of objects, and so doing my objective science in that way, and looking at the materials of my science in this from a very apparently detached perspective, which does not invite relating, does not invite sharing, does not invite listening either. In that role as the scientist, I was the one imposing my perspective onto the world that I was apparently trying to understand. So then I had a big crisis that came through because I'm traditionally trained as a marine scientist, and it came through from my work with the coral reef fishes that I was studying, and the awakening, I guess, the realization that well, what I was doing was not on. There was no way there were objects of my research. If anything, they were subject, and as subject, they had something, they had their own story to tell. And if I wanted to really understand who they are, then I need to be able to listen to that story and then see how that story integrates, influence, affects, shapes my own story as the human interacting. And I moved on to plants because I couldn't find a way to do my science as an animal ecologist that would allow me to, not kill, basically, because that's at the end the bottom line. Like if it's an object, you just use it, and we then discard it when we are done, which is what we do in a larger scale with many things. And so, and when I started working with plants, it was very clear that I needed to find a new approach, but I didn't know what that was. And the plant showed the way. The plant taught me how. And all I had to do was to learn how to listen. And again, this is being the big theme of today. And for me, it's fundamental because it did change me as the person, the individual, the private self, if there is such a thing. And then, of course, naturally, that overflowed into how I produced in my science. And but being able to see both perspectives was very useful, because then, I think that any change, especially at this time, which seems very, change is very drastic and it seems very dramatic. I think that anybody that can see multiple perspectives at the same time is also coming with the responsibility to use kindness towards those that haven't quite seen the multiverse yet. And I'm referring also to an anthropologist, Viviero de Castro, who highlight the fact that seeing multiple perspectives and acknowledging multiple perspectives doesn't mean that you say, oh yeah, I see your point, but this is my point. And it's more about acknowledging that all of these perspectives are coexisting, they all have the same value, and they describe multiple worlds that are co-occurring at the same time. And the world that we have been living in for the last few centuries is being governed, dominated by one perspective, which is really the Eurocentric colonial perspective, and science is the right arm of that. And, you know, we are the servants of that. And he has created a particular perspective and made us all believe that that's the only way the world exists. But the world, there are so many worlds, as Stephen was saying, like every bird, every connection, every relationship, every tree, every child is a world. So acknowledging that there are so many worlds, and that's our richness. That's really the beauty. And to wake up to that, I think the world will be such an incredible place, because suddenly there will be abundance instead of this scarcity thing that we believe in, and it's not real. Obviously, it's not real. You look outside and you can see it's not true. So, long story for the answer of a really big question is like changing the paradigm means that it's gonna change you, and if you're prepared for that. Sometimes, as I did, you go down kicking and screaming, and some other times you go down maybe a little bit more gracefully. Ultimately, I think what I've learned, and the place where I'm at the moment, is that I know that it's not for me to make any particular decision. I'm just listening and doing what I'm told. And the ones that are speaking are not necessarily other humans, sometimes, but very rarely I listen to those. Mostly is what comes directly from, you know, the land, the trees, the animals, everything that is around me, the fire, the water, everything that is around me. And trying to remember what it means to be human again.
Thank you, Monica. We do have another question here. Shakar shares how the discussion reminds him about quantum physics and the fact that a certain scale, matter, and wave are interchangeable. So could the panel answer or guess by which process would ancient cultures would have come to a similar conclusion? Could their approach would have been more philosophical or observational?
Perhaps I can try, because I do work a little bit in quantum field. I think quantum is, like Monica said, I think it's a beautifully that the world has a particular framework, and that happens to be colonial or Eurocentric. But I also think, Monica, that you said earlier, we just sometimes go away from some place where the reality is, just to find out. You know, you have to get lost sometimes to find yourself. And so I think we should be very grateful to Eurocentric and colonial perspective, because that has just told us that how lost we are now, and we can find ourselves. Same idea is about quantum. I mean, quantum is today considered as one of there are quantum computing, there is quantum processes, because what it tells is we just don't know how we are where we are. The quantum basically tells we have no idea how we appear some places. We just appear some places. And there is no way to explain from modern science point of view, Newtonian point of view, that how we get somewhere, because it's just appeared. So, but I think this is a process. I feel it is a process. The quantum will become eventually what I think we all, Steve and myself and Monica and everybody else has been telling, that we are really all connected. We are not separate. And that's why we appear here and we appear there. The plants appear in our genes appear in plants. It's just a kind of a quantum process, appearing and disappearing. But really, when the day you connect yourself, that, oh, we are all the same, we are all connected, there's no difference actually. So there is no question of appearing or disappearing. Actually the quantum disappears that day. There will be a day when the quantum will completely disappear, because we will identify ourselves with everything that is around us, because we are it. There is no other thing around, and don't need to listen to words or even make an observation. Just being. Once you become the being of everything, then every other perspective disappears. And I think that is at least today I feel that's where we are going. And how the ancients were doing, again, being many countries and seeing many indigenous people is my interest, but knowing more about India and its philosophy, and that philosophy is called yoga. Yoga basically means you unite with everything, not just the human beings. You start with your body and mind to learn, and then eventually connect with the whole cosmos. And that is I think the ancients, those who, like Monica says, she doesn't even care to listen to human beings. I mean, she's just into whatever else is. I think the ancients, and even maybe some moderns who live indigenous life, they probably don't care. You can do whatever you want to do, and that's the way perhaps the nature is.
Thank you, Bayram. We do have a lot of questions here, and Ivan Dario asks, Steve is talking about the relational interdependence. So, and not being prior to relations. So how can we remember those relations? Can the ingestion of plants as people help us remember?
It's a great question. I think it connects to all the things that are being said here. As Andy licks my ear, I'm very aware of, the complexity of what it means to be a companion or have a companion in the world. So being and relating, I think what it means to remember is to commit oneself to an ethic of care. And that ethic of care has to do with amplifying, your sensory relations with all others, whether they're with plants, whether they're with things you eat, whether they're with any and everything you live with, and the way in which, and this gets to I think the quantum point too, and the question about experiencing the world. I mean, if you have 40,000 years to accumulate knowledge, extraordinary things happen. You can develop a linguistic system where every vowel in the language not only is, arbitrary in words, but it can signify a direction from which a sound, something comes. So people in the rainforest can develop an entire language for understanding sound and motion that is very complex in physics. For example, sound bounces off trees. We have reflections. And so where a sound is actually coming from in a rainforest is pretty complex from an acoustician's point of view or a physical point of view. People there talk about the world being lift up over sounding. And so what does it mean that sound is always outward reaching by upward reaching? What does it mean that people use a reduplicated word in language, goo goo gaw gaw, to mean echo? Goo is sound moving downward. Goo goo is continuously sound moving downward. Gaw is sound moving outward. Gaw gaw is continuously sound moving outward. Goo goo gaw gaw is echo or reverberation. How in 40,000 years did people come to something that could be simultaneously so extraordinarily aesthetic and poetic, and it's used that way, as well as, an extraordinarily precise way of understanding what is ambiguous, what is an echo, what is a reverberation in an environment where there are so many sonic reflections. So observation, these things come to be written on the body as, kinds of knowledge. They come to be written into the sound system of the language. They come to be written into, what we call perceptual adaptation, or, a kind of ecological understanding of perception, an ecological understanding of something like acoustics. So I think these are ways in which memory and amplification and the process of knowing and continually, feeling your sense of a certain sense of newness and freshness every day in the world, but at the same time, a sense of mastery of this world, which comes from, a kind of expertise in living, and expertise in living and hearing that world. And that's really one of the main things that I've learned from all the years of being together with Bosabi people.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stephen. So I think these are our questions for today. David?
Okay, well, then this will be the time to say goodbye to everyone. Well, and to thank everyone for making this happen. For the International Center for Cultural Studies, it's amazing that we have this opportunity to bring together these great panelists to share their perspectives with us, and for us to foster this conversation, for the audience to bring those insightful questions as well. So I want to extend that gratitude to all of you who have made this possible, and also to invite you, because this doesn't end tonight. So this conversation ends for tonight, and the conference sessions for tonight end, but tomorrow we will have more sessions starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Actually, the session that will start at that time is the rights of the living pristine rainforest, which is going to look into that need that we have to recognize the forest as living systems that are entitled to rights as a person. This concept is very familiar for many ancient cultures, and there were measures that they had implemented, part even of the law of origin. So we're going to speak about this tomorrow. The panelists and the moderator for this session will share their insights with us about this. So with that, I'll close the session for tonight, and I express once again my gratitude to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.